Marcy, can you, I don't know if we should introduce people.
Why don't we go around and introduce them?
That would be great, thank you.
I'm OAKLAVIA and I'm the event coordinator.
Excellent. My name's Chris Huang. I'm with Walk Oakland, Bike Oakland, and we're the organizers of OAKLAVIA.
And I'm Jim McElvain. I'm the Special Events Coordinator with the City of Oakland.
I'm Laura McCamey. I'm a member of the BPAC and also the Love Our Neighborhood Day Core Committee.
Jeannie Quine with the Police Department. Nora Davis, Council.
Ken James with the Police Department.
I'm Jennifer West with the council, and I also work at Transform. I know a bunch of WOBO folks there.
I'm Maurice Coffin. I'm the Public Works Director. Mike Roberts, Public Works.
Public Works.
Ken Bukowski, member of the BPAC, former council member.
This item is on the transportation committee agenda because it came to the events coordinator, and a number of departments need to comment on and make recommendations and so on. OAKLAVIA is an event that's based on a repeated event that happened in Bogota, Colombia years ago called CECLAVIA, and it took place in Oakland. Twice?
Yes, in 2010 and last year.
Yeah. Okay. 2 years. Yeah. Okay. I didn't realize that. It was very successful in Oakland, and organizers came to the city of Emeryville to see if people in Emeryville wanted to participate, and came to the BPAC to ask for recommendations, suggestions, and that kind of thing. And basically, it's an event where some streets are closed so that people can have their event in the street, and it's not necessarily a parade, but just an open streets event like in San Francisco and Berkeley. I guess there's an organizing committee that started meeting for a few times, and the event application came to Roselle in the last couple weeks, and so here we are.
Can I add one little bit about OAKLAVIA? The original CECLAVIA in Bogota had two major purposes. One was to get people out and being physically active, and there's a lot of exercise. You could walk or bike, but there's exercise classes, like there's a lot of free activities around the route. And the other thing they wanted in Colombia was to mix people from different neighborhoods, because they found that neighborhoods were boundaries and people from different classes and sectors didn't mix, and so this route goes through many neighborhoods. And that has maybe been less true for the ones in the Bay Area because they're smaller, but I know San Francisco's tried to do some of that, get people out to different neighborhoods. And I personally think this is a nice, not that people from Emeryville and Oakland don't mix, we certainly do, but it's a nice opportunity. It's a public health benefit, and it's an opportunity for us to, talk about how we're two cities, but we're also kind of one big neighborhood in North Oakland, Golden Gate, Emeryville area.
And I'll just facilitate some of our conversations because I had put in the application for the community event, and I apologize if it was so vague because I think part of the process is actually making sure that the city of Emeryville is represented in our conversations about the routes, the activities, the traffic management, obviously public works involvement. And that's also why I actually asked Jim to be part of this conversation. And he's on the core planning team as well because we work really closely with the city staff on the execution, planning, design, and outreach and public notice of the event. So, and we just wanted to make sure that there was enough opportunity for people to really put their feedback into the design itself. And also we're at an early enough phase where we haven't really vetted the entire route with AC Transit yet. So we'll go into a little bit more detail about that. So I know that there was, I was prepared to talk about a few of the questions that may come up because this is a transportation committee. In terms of the different teams working on Love Our Neighborhood Day, the core planning team includes Emeryville BPAC representatives. Swantha and Laura are on the team, along with Jim and myself representing Walk Oakland, Bike Oakland. There are other board members on Walk Oakland, Bike Oakland, or WOBO, I'll just shorten that. What we wanted to do, I believe several of you are also on the email distribution list, so we're really encouraging Emeryville staff to be part of the conversation. There are definitely times where it's really, really important for the city staff to be involved, and then there are other times where we're talking about little fundraising bits here and there, and you don't have to be there at every single meeting. But that's the core planning team. We really sit around to draft out the concept, identify the event objectives, and then put some draft designs together to be vetted with the different lead activities leads and the volunteer leads. In terms of the execution of the event, we will be hiring an event coordinator to really lasso in all the different parts and the logistical matters in the days leading up to the event, as well as day of event, and also closing the loop. We're also hiring a traffic specialist. Jim will talk about his experience working with Steve Tiffin, who is on the top of our candidate list for managing our traffic. And then also a volunteer coordinator. Really, the person is responsible for, I would say, up to 200 volunteers a day of. The route is a pretty significant route that we're looking at, and is going to require a huge amount of volunteers, but we've done it before, we've done it really well, and so far so good. So that's the execution of the event. In terms of traffic planning, I talked about being in conversation with city staff, but also AC Transit. We have some communication to do with Caltrans, and Jim's got plenty of experience doing that. We also noticed that Amtrak coaches do run through one segment of the route, and we'll make sure that that's discussed fully with Amtrak as well. What's relevant to this particular committee? I think one thing that I would say is the resident and merchants outreach is really important. We have some plans to do very, very early outreach in terms of just talking about the event, and then as we get closer to the event, actually doing door-to-door, door hangers, as well as in-person communication. And then about a week prior to the event, signs start popping up to say these are the streets that are going to be affected during the day of the event. So parking's going to be prohibited here. There are other alternate plans for detours. So lots of these are details to be worked out once we finalize the route itself. So good wayfinding is a pretty significant piece. I think last year what we learned is that because this event really encourages people to move through the route. So it's not just a street festival, it's a movement, it's a health thing. You want people to go from location to location to location, either on their own 2 feet or by bicycle or some human-powered mechanism. We do find that some people do have mobility issues, just age, I think, in general. It happens. So we're trying to find different ways of actually helping people to move from location to location, really enjoy all the amenities throughout the route. So those are the things that we're considering at this time. I think this particular route that we're looking at is a bit different from the route around the lake. At one time we used to think the circular route was easier, but it's really not. I think the one benefit of doing Love Our Neighborhood Day on these particular streets is that there are lots of detour options that weren't available around a circular route. So it's very encouraging, and there are actually some very viable detour routes that have less of an impact on residences than our Lake Merritt route. So those are the things that we're considering. So I'm going to let Jim talk about his experience sort of organizing with Steve Tiffin and also with Caltrans and AC Transit.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having us today. I'm going to send some materials around as examples of what we've done in the past with the OAKLAVIA event as far as some detouring activity. Let me have one just so I can refer to it. There are kind of 2 things here. It talks a little bit about the, this first document is 2-sided to save on paper. It shows how we communicate with our volunteer and street monitor organizers at particular intersections about how to handle the vehicular traffic that may come to a particular intersection. All of these plans were developed by Steve Tiffin, who is the former executive director of the old Festival at the Lake, if you remember Festival at the Lake, around Lake Merritt. He's currently the operations and festival director for Art and Soul. He produces the Temescal Street Fair, Rockridge Out and About, and he was the one who created the traffic management plan for the OAKLAVIA Love Our Lake Day last June. So in many ways, I'm kind of representing him here today. These are his plans and documentation. The point is that he takes this extremely seriously. He knows how to engage with training the volunteer public street monitors as well as sworn officers on how to get people in and around a detoured traffic management area. So on the two-sided document, you have an example of a very busy intersection coming into Lake Merritt at Bellevue and Grand Avenue, with a very detailed where we happen to still have AC Transit buses running along Grand Avenue. Plus, we wanted to allow for some modest vehicular traffic into Lake Merritt on Bellevue. That's not always going to be the case, depending on the route and the detours and where the course is going to make itself known here in the Golden Gate, Emeryville, San Pablo neighborhood. On the other side, it gives a detour for the motorist to be able to show how to get around, how to continue their path. It may mean a couple of lefts and a rights and a turn and an awkward excursion that they're not normally used to, but there's some clarity to it, so the volunteer can inform the motorist how to get around. I need to get to this other part, I need to get to another location. These are examples of how he takes it to the intersection, to the finite area. We know as event organizers, we advertise, we promote, we put out posters, postcards. We talk about this event in a very global term of how exciting it can be. But it really comes down to how it affects the individual resident and business per block, per street, per house. And that's the effort that this continued organization will bring to bear. So everybody knows how it's going to affect them that day. Last Sunday was the 5th running of the Oakland Running Festival. And a lot of our best practices have been developed out of that 26.2-mile circle around Oakland. How it affects residents, businesses, and AC Transit. And they're a very important partner in this. The Running Festival over the 5 years has been able to tweak and change their route with a little bit of feedback from AC Transit. If you do this, guys, then we can run a bus over here. If you do that, we can get through this intersection. We can continue northbound traffic. It's gotten a lot better. The number of complaints and concerns on race day have diminished dramatically. That is a sign that we're doing our job both working with the public and AC Transit and communicating what is going to happen that day in a very clear manner so they can be informed. And that goes to this neighborhood notification. This is an example of a flyer we've developed through the marathon. This is very specific to a very specific block, a very specific area, where the running festival will be coming through between 8:15 and 11:15. And this is how it affects you. You won't be able to get out of your driveway that day. Now that's specific to the running festival. We're going to have a whole different strategy when it comes to what happens in the Golden Gate, Emeryville, San Pablo area. But as that gets developed, I just want to show you examples of how the interaction is with residents and business ahead of time. And Chris alluded to that very, very clearly. And I'm here for answering any questions that you may have.
Will you talk a little bit about Caltrain?
Caltrains, yeah. I went to Oakland Police. Of course, I work with Oakland Police a lot. We do a lot of street closures for major festivals in and around Oakland, including the Running Festival, the Holiday Parade, Black Cowboy Parade, Chinatown Street Festival, Dia de los Muertos. So we do this on a regular basis. They informed me that if it's city streets, and I believe this also goes for the city of Emeryville, even though San Pablo is Highway 123 or whatever the designation is, that they still have ultimate right and control because it's not a California state highway. That they have the ability to close that roadway off, informing them of what's happening, but the street closure does not have to go through any formal Caltrans notification. The time that we have to do that for the Running Festival is to put out 2 permits for the freeway off-ramps that we close for the Running Festival. After Highway 24 and Highway 13, we close those for a temporary between 8 and 11 that are not available for the public to use. But as far as we've closed down International, just last Sunday for the Running Festival, we closed down Broadway all the time, we closed down parts of San Pablo, And the police informed me in our special events unit that it's city streets, and they sort of have the dictate for the rules of the road for the public right-of-way in that instance.
Well, that's correct, except San Pablo Avenue is State Highway 123, and we do not have that authority between 36th Street North.
Okay?
55th.
Well,
53rd.
Between 53rd and
To 53rd for Emeryville, but
Right.
even north of that, that's still the state highway. The state highway ends at 36th Street. So south of 36th Street, Oakland can close San Pablo at any time. But north of 53rd, or north of 36th Street, all the way out through Richmond, it's not subject to local control.
I think what Jim is saying is that, what you're saying is correct for like if we wanted to change the streetlights, which we've wrestled with.
No, if we wanna close it.
But even closing it,
Yes.
like if there were construction going on,
Yes,
on that,
Yeah, I
there was a
mean,
construction closure,
Yeah,
any kind
we
of.
technically need to go in there for, well, we have rights to maintain certain parts of the sidewalk and let's say the storm drain, but we don't have authority to shut down the street.
Well, and maybe we should, this is a good time to talk about the route, because some of us rode the route last time, and the route that we submitted in the packet to Roselle, we came up with a slightly different, which I think will have much less impact on traffic.
And I also want to be clear, this is again what I've been informed by our Oakland police. The gray area here is that also International Boulevard is 185. And so we have been closing that for 5 years and had
Well, there might
absolutely
be
no trouble at all.
different arrangements between
Yeah.
Caltrans and Oakland.
And I certainly
It
have,
might be worth a conversation with
Exactly.
Caltrans to make sure
Yeah.
that
Right.
everyone's on the same page.
right.
So I just wanted, before we get into this, I just wanted to ask about the notifications.
Yeah.
When you're going through neighborhoods, you know, where it's residential and you want to let people know where it's small businesses and that kind of thing, I understand, you know, how it's handled, but I'm just wondering in situations like we have in Emeryville where we have a regional draw and people are coming in that don't live here from, who knows, I don't know, all the places they come from, and they're coming to Bay Street, and they're coming to Powell Street, and they're doing all those, you know, coming from other points, east or whatever. How do they find out? I'm just wondering, when I see something like this and it says, if you want to get around this, this is how you do it. How do people find this out when they come into town for the?
Can I just say, I don't think this is going to affect Bay Street or the public market,
Mhm.
because it's going to be to the east of those.
Yeah.
So people coming from the freeway to go to those, people who are coming from, going
The 80s.
west
Yeah.
to that will have some traffic impacts, but I think the new route will make it much easier for them to get through on the route they're most likely to take, which is Stanford to Powell.
What's the proposed date for the?
July 12th.
It's a
Saturday, July 12th. But to answer your concern, a lot of it is that is handed to somebody as they approach or come to an intersection and handed to them that day to assist them,
Okay.
because it is impossible to get absolutely everybody. We know there's one Bay Bridge and one closure for the construction, and it's easy to point everybody to that
Yeah.
particular closure, but there are people coming in from all sorts of
Yeah.
areas. So when they hit an intersection that has detours to it,
They're handed something.
exactly, or pointed or handed, and then they're gone off their merry way. So
Something that would be helpful with each route proposal would be also a detour proposal
Yeah.
to accompany it.
Definitely, I think,
That's what we're gonna be looking at.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the one thing is that because the route isn't finalized yet,
Right.
it's really, really hard to start doing the detour plan. However, what you see in this particular map are some, sorry, this is a very basic rudimentary Google map rendition, but what you see in the blue pinpoints are actually places where we have more of informational, directional guidance among volunteers who are trying to help traffic navigate around the area before they even get close enough to the route, as well as if residents really have to get in and out, they're kind of in those locations to help direct traffic. And then there are red pinpoints, and this is just a very, very first take, and it hasn't gone through any sort of vetting with our traffic specialists or anything, but it's just a sense of what most likely will have to happen in terms of hard closures. The reds are more complicated, and then the purple ones are actually something that Laura, Sal, and I when we were riding the route on Saturday, thought, you know, this is probably the biggest area where I think we're going to run into some traffic detour issues, because Stanford Powell is just such a main route through the area, and San Pablo. I think that, so those are some considerations. This is just a starting point where we have different degrees of detour needs, as well as different degrees of traffic control, both for people who are at the event, as well as traffic trying to circumnavigate the event. And so it ends up being, you know, probably a 50-page detour plan, just because every single intersection, even intersections about 2-3 blocks away from the event, actually has some plan or design to inform people ahead of time.
What's your definition of a soft closure?
It would be a place where we would still allow traffic to cut across a route, or and that's both auto traffic or people. I think when I'm thinking of soft closure, it's mostly auto traffic. It's just allowing slower, controlled movement of auto traffic flowing through.
And this Stanford Powell, is that soft closure?
We were thinking traffic would go through. I think that would make the whole thing much simpler if we don't try to close.
Maybe have crossing guards at each of the.
We would have to have serious, and
uniformed.
as we wrote it, I think the biggest issue, and where we're going to need the most, you know, volunteers and probably also some professionals, police, is at Doyle Street, because well, and we'll probably need police at both sides, but the Oakland side of it, the Stanford and San Pablo side, there's a light. And what I've seen in other open streets events is where there's, like on Berkeley, they have University open, and people need, the open streets is on 2 sides of University, and they just use the light. When there's the light, the volunteers make sure that no bicyclists and walkers go across and the traffic can go. When the light changes, they make sure that cars aren't trying to turn, you know, they sort of make sure it goes well. Because we don't have a light at Doyle, there's a light at Hollis. We're gonna just need to, you know, maybe we can do some signage, slow cars down, because we're gonna need to stop them manually to, you know, make time for cars to go and time for people to go. And so it'll just be a little bit more complicated because there's not a light there.
Is the reason you don't go north of 65th because you get into Berkeley and you have to deal with Berkeley closures?
You know, I think one of the thoughts, and Sal from the actual cafe, who is at 65th, is one of the progenitors of this, and the Golden Gate Neighborhood Association, and that's sort of about the boundary of their association. The thought is that if it's a successful event, it would be great to incorporate Berkeley next year, and maybe have a route that goes farther north. But for now, they decided that the original people who came up with the idea. I think, is that accurate?
And this route is actually a long enough route to not wear people totally out, but it's long enough to get people moving from place to place. I would say, just as someone who would walk this route, it actually will take a long time to get through. So it's not a tiny little route. It actually does stretch quite a bit.
How long was the route around the lake? How many
It
miles
was 3.5 miles.
And this is
This
I
is
think
probably in about 3.
So it's similar length, a little bit shorter.
Can I ask about the circular thing you were mentioning earlier and detours and all that? I mean, this is not circular, obviously, it's more of a grid, so we have a rectangle. But I wasn't sure exactly what your point was, because the lake obviously is circular,
Yes.
right?
So,
and how does that differ?
So for example, if the natural detours are off 53rd and Hollis, and you can still take Ashby or this.
There's more options.
Yeah, there are more options to get around to the other side. Now in the lake, you had to go off into, and it could have fanned out into different directions. It wasn't really clear, like, I thought I was going north, now I'm going west,
Oh, I see
kind
what
of
you're
thing.
saying. Okay.
So
because it's a grid pattern.
it's a
a
grid
little
pattern,
more
you have
clear.
lots of options.
Got
And
it.
what's nice is also Hollis doesn't have as many residential areas that would be affected. It's actually a really nice, clean route to divert folks.
So during the event, if somebody living in the middle of your room, if they need to get out,
They can get out.
They can get out. I think our thinking is to push them down to Stanford and then direct them out.
But
Through
I
area.
think
That's just
there
our
might also
option.
be some other intersections in the middle here, you know, one or two where through traffic or internal traffic can get out. We certainly will accommodate people so they're not.
the traffic coming in would be a little bit more difficult.
Well, also the same thing, I think people coming in, since Powell and Stanford will be open to traffic, like if somebody wanted to get into the center of that grid, they would be able to. And that's one of the communication things that we'll do, that we won't just inform people directly on the route, but anyone inside that grid will come up with some kind of informational thing so that they have an idea how it's going to impact them. And clearly, you know, any businesses on the route.
Might not be a good day to have a kid's birthday party or something.
Or they can, so the little red zone
Or it might be
there.
a great day to have it in the street.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
They can all ride their bikes.
So the little red zone with the little pink inside is actually what we saw was a perfect sort of kids zone, really a multi-block area that is just filled with a safe kiddie play. So those are some of the things to consider, but that also means that the adjacent streets really have to be well controlled and well defined. So those are the many considerations that go into the thinking about the route and then also traffic control plans. I would say that it's not, I mean, there will be a pretty substantial traffic control plan. I can't say that it looks complicated. I mean, there are some parts that are more intense than others, but I have to say, you know, relative to the Lake Merritt route,
And when you do
feels
your
much better.
events in Oakland, who does the traffic control? Is it sworn officers or
Combination of
volunteers?
both, combination of both, yeah, absolutely sworn officers, and we work ahead of time, excuse me, to identify those very, very critical intersections, high impact, maybe right off a freeway that really need a sworn officer. We turn a lot of for the running festival, we'll turn our red-green lights to flashing red to give a complete control point on all 4 directions as they come in. But there are also trained volunteers that have done this for 5 years that know and understand how to route people. You have to turn left here, ma'am, sorry, you have to go this way, the freeway entrance
And you
is
don't
down
have
that
any
way.
problem with civilians in the past directing people? There's been no incidents or anything like that?
No injuries or problems. The only concerns that have come up have been the vehicular, traffic saying, no, I ignore you, and blast on through an intersection because it's not a sworn officer. And that's the only time we've ever had any trouble or concern. It was written about in the paper this weekend that somebody swerved around cones. No one was hurt or injured. This just was an impatient driver who chose not to pay attention to the traffic safety monitor and went straight instead of turning left, But
Well,
it's pretty rare when that
Looking
happens.
at this proposed route, do you have any ballpark idea of how many sworn officers?
I would not want to venture that because it's really a conversation between Oakland and Emeryville Police with the traffic safety plan and what's going on with AC Transit.
So have you had any consideration on what the detour would be for San Pablo?
Can I talk about that?
Yes.
Sure.
I'm certainly not an expert on any of this, but there are some sensitive streets here. 53rd Street, we know the neighbors are very sensitive to traffic. We certainly want to try to divert most traffic before 53rd. There's no part of San Pablo Avenue in Emeryville that would be closed to traffic, but we want to suggest people, we want to probably inform people at 40th Street that there's a detour ahead and suggest that through traffic go to Hollis Street. And then probably again at maybe 45th Street at another street, and maybe that would be identified again by the traffic consultant, but where the next best place is to suggest that people, non-local traffic go off. And maybe again, at like 50.
Well, 53rd has this traffic signal at Hollis, so,
And we have
Laura,
to
what would the
consider,
hours be
Yeah.
then?
Pardon?
What would the hours?
That's 10 to 2, I think is what we're thinking, or
11 to 3.
11 to 3.
11 to 3.
11 to 3. So we're not talking, that's the other thing I want to say, this is temporary.
right.
This is not like, it's just, and it would, obviously the closure would be more than that 4 hours because we need time on both ends.
How much, I was wondering how long
I
that is.
don't,
It depends. It depends on where the staging areas are, and sometimes at 3 o'clock certain areas can open right up.
But if there's a lot of
but
equipment,
if-
staging, whatever.
Exactly, if there are certain areas where a significant amount of activities are happening, or really major traffic has got to be controlled for a longer period of time, you'll see things open up on a rolling basis.
If I can just speak from the police department's point of view on this, and we reviewed the application, we've also, just listening to what you're saying here, this is a Saturday, I believe, July 12th, which is, if you've taken your bike tour, notice that it can be gridlock in our city from those who are basically trying to reach to our shopping centers, whether it's Target or whether it's Bayfair or other parts of the city. A lot of people coming off of the freeway and addressing your concerns, Marcy, from people outside of the city visiting our city, bypass the Powell Street exit and will take Ashby to take San Pablo to reach the shopping centers, because our streets, Hollis, Horton, are basically backed up in regards to the shopping.
They don't take Shellmound. They go all the way to Ashby.
They will try to bypass hitting 40th.
I mean,
and
San Pablo.
Powell, and then they will take San Pablo and they will cut over all of our streets. In fact, our officers know not to stay on the west side of the city because it's hard to get to the east end. And then when you have it, depending on the hours, if you're having it in the afternoon, it's going to be very difficult to manage that. So that's one of our concerns. Second of all, just to let you know, because you have your running festival, we have our duathlon, which is coming up in April. Although volunteers are trained, and this has been an annual event, what we've noticed is that we can't always depend on having those trained volunteers, because they are volunteers. They may not be able to show up, so we have sworn officers or our traffic personnel at each intersection, because we're finding out that the cars do bypass more what the volunteers state, because they figure that that's not that there's no penalties for bypassing. So we will have to basically, what I anticipate, if this is going to be a long event, having it, much like July 4th, having all of our department to monitor not only the intersections and the street closures, but also to these street kid zones, and making sure that those are safe. And so it will be an all-hands muster.
So that's a significant overtime cost.
Yes, it would be just like July 4th.
Yeah. Following along, what sort of resources have you asked for from Public Works in Oakland when you put on these events? What did the Public Works?
Over time, I can speak to the running festival because it is a massive undertaking, as you can well imagine, with thousands and thousands of cones to delineate the course. Is we actually ended up hiring a traffic safety professional who does this on a regular basis, that have the crew and equipment and the trucks to be able to get the cones and the delineators and the A-frames out into the field in a much more progressive manner. Then relying upon a skeleton staff of Public Works employees on the weekend. So that for a large event like the Running Festival, it's a much better cause to use a group like that do it on a regular basis. Again, that have the high volume of cones and all that. For some of the smaller events, it all comes down to the traffic management plan and where equipment can be staged, and we do that again through our Public Works. They would deliver the gear, and then the traffic safety officers would put it where as needed. That's what would happen during the Love Our Lake Day. So they brought the gear out, both cones and delineators and A-frames and steel frames, and placed them out in strategic areas, and then they were used and then brought back. So that's how it was best used, best put into the field.
And I would just say, in 2010, Oakland Police also insisted, we didn't do the 2010 OAKLAVIA around the lake, we did it through downtown. The Oakland Police Department really insisted at that time that every single intersection had a uniformed police officer, and by 2013 they really had changed their tune about it. I think partly was that they had learned that there are some intersections that are more sensitive and that are more dangerous than others, and that's where they will absolutely always have people out there. As a matter of fact, there are some intersections where we had learned last year that really should have uniformed officers out there, but instead only had volunteer crew. We're gonna adjust to make sure that those sensitive spots are well covered. For sure, I think that their sense of the level of coverage that's needed has evolved over time, and I'm also, you know, I think that yeah, there are a lot of intersections that are. I think it's necessary to have a uniform presence, just because there are going to be. I mean, we expect about 15,000 people to be at the event, so. It's also, there's something a little bit different about these kinds of events too, in that with enough people in the streets, it really feels like you should be slowing down. I think that's the one.
And not driving in there.
And not driving
like may have happened at the running festival.
Correct.
There might have been a moment where there were no runners, or I don't know.
That's right.
That's
Yeah,
exactly
and there will be
right.
no
It's a
moments
perception.
like that,
Yeah.
where there's an empty street.
So the date is absolutely solidly set, from your perspective?
It coincides with second Saturdays, which is a golden.
The reason I
event.
ask that is,
Yeah.
as Jeannie, Commander Wong mentioned, on July 4th, we turn out all of our very, very small police force. So then we're asking them less than 10 days later to come back and have another all-thing turnout. I don't know about you, but that's a lot to ask of those young men and women.
Well, we'll have to
You know, the
evaluate.
conjunction of the dates in terms of what it puts on the police department. And it's somewhat true of the Public Works too, because they have to do a lot of prep for the 4th of July.
Back to the detours though, you talked a little bit about northbound San Pablo, what do you do for southbound San Pablo? Don't you have
At
to?
Ashby, that would be.
So you'd have to work with Berkeley to allow that detour?
And also.
Ashby to Hollis, I guess?
Yeah, Ashby to
Yeah, or
Hollis.
Sacramento, you should, I mean, emphasize that you can
They
go
could
both
go either
ways,
way.
Sacramento and Adeline.
Yeah, and Market Street, you know.
Market Street also.
Which-
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, the nice thing about this route is there are a lot of parallel routes
Yeah.
that can get people, and now that the east, you know, that we sort of altered the route to make east-west not blocked, I think the traffic management, I think, will be much easier. And I also want to just say, we're talking about all the problems, and I don't want to minimize them, because absolutely it is a big, management thing. But I also want to say, I think it's an amazing event for businesses and for the community. And the route in Emeryville has several businesses, and there are also a bunch of Emeryville businesses that are just off the route that we're going to invite to have a presence on the route. People may discover restaurants and cafes that they didn't know about, and I know that generally restaurants on the route are just wall to wall during the time, because people are out and exercising and they're hungry and they want to do this. And places like the National Holistic Institute will get a ton of exposure. We're hoping that they will come out and do some kind of something in the street. So it's an awesome opportunity to showcase Emeryville and to bring people to Emeryville in a different way. Maybe not as, oh my gosh, the gridlocked, I can't get off the freeway, I have to sit for 20 minutes to get into Bay Street, but as, wow, look at this beautiful street in Emeryville, this beautiful landscaping, public art. Like, we really want to bring Emeryville's creative spirit and our wonderful businesses to the Emeryville part of the route and showcase that. And businesses, and I'll just tell you a little story. I went to the very first Open Streets in San Francisco, which was a number of years ago. It was along the Embarcadero, and they had wanted to take the route into Fisherman's Wharf, and the merchants at Fisherman's Wharf said, no way in hell are you going to close our streets to traffic. We don't want you. And it was still really fun, and at the end of the event, everyone was like, now what do we do? Because there's not a whole lot along, that other part of the route. And the next year, the Fisherman's Wharf merchants said, please come to our neighborhood. And I have never seen Fisherman's Wharf so packed. I couldn't ride my bike. I mean, you could barely walk. And I used to work down there. I've never seen that many people at Fisherman's Wharf. It was great, and they invite, and the people in San Francisco now, they take it to different neighborhoods. And they have neighborhoods begging them to bring it because it's so great for the neighborhood. It's tons of kids. If you've been to the one in Berkeley there, it's just tiny little kids are safe to ride their bikes all over the street and they're not going to get hurt. It's a really popular event. People really enjoy it and it brings great exposure to the neighborhood. In fact, who knows, maybe if this happens and it's popular, Bay Street is going to say, please, can you bring it here? I'm not holding my breath.
You never know.
One step at a time.
I'm really excited. I'm just upset that I won't be in town.
That's my thing. You still have time to change your mind.
So in terms of the route, did you imagine getting feedback from everybody here, whether everybody likes it or needs to change anything?
I think it would be great. I think also we'd like to invite people out to the route itself. We did the ride last Saturday, and it did change some of our perspective about some of these areas. So if anything, I would say, yes, feedback on the route itself today would be great. And I know that there's some major concerns about traffic management in certain areas, and I'd love to hear them. More importantly, I would like to invite a couple of you who are most interested in what happens on the route to come out to ride the route with us again, because I really think that on a Saturday when you can see when it's happening during the hours of 11 to 3, just being able to feel what it's like in particular areas and give us feedback at that moment, because it certainly changed my perspective about some of these areas. So,
as part of the traffic management, if you're expecting 15,000 people, I don't know that there's 15,000 in this area that.
They'll be coming from out of the area.
Have you put into the traffic management plan a parking management plan?
it will ultimately. We did have one of our direct wayfinding outreach materials did talk about public parking areas where we encourage people, if you are coming from out of town, there are some parking lots that you can go to, but Lake Merritt also is sitting right on top of 3 BART stations, and lots of buses also get close enough to the route. So there's the take public transit, there is public lots, and telling people how best to get there. So those are the kinds of messaging that we.
The Lake Merritt run has 3 BART stations there. We have 2 that are quite a bit of ways. I mean,
Well,
Berkeley and
Ashby.
And
West
that's
Side.
right.
and MacArthur.
Again, I'm not too sure how big a problem it will be. I mean, the Solano Stroll, which is similar to this,
Huge.
they get like 90,000 people, and all the cars get absorbed in the neighborhood.
Well, that's what I'm worried about. We have parking in the neighborhood now, and they're going to be inundated with these cars. That's what I'm worried about.
That will happen, I'm sure.
Where-
But it's 4 hours and I think.
Well, and I also, I think
expected.
we will really be encouraging people to come by transit, and one of our pipe dream hopes is that we can somehow convince the Emeryville round to run from MacArthur BART closer, and I think on the weekends, the closest it comes is Powell and Hollis. I don't know if it goes to Amtrak on the weekends.
Goes to Hollis and 65th, doesn't it?
Not on the weekends.
Oh,
Not on
that's
the weekends, so
right.
it doesn't
No, it
tend to
just
go
goes down
north.
exponentially.
I mean, that would still get people close enough that they could potentially walk, but that adds, if you're walking it, that adds quite a bit, especially if you have kids. So we're hoping we can work with them. I don't know how likely that is.
Have you reached out to them yet?
Not yet. No, that's one of our to-dos, is to talk to them and see if they would be willing to run shuttles, or somebody else to somehow get a shuttle running from MacArthur or Ashby BART, so that would encourage people. But if people are on bikes, we can tell them the bike route from the stations is not that far to ride your bike.
In terms of public notice, I think it is important to let the residents know that, yes, there's going to be an influx of overflow traffic.
Well, I would just encourage that instead of just saying, oh, they're gonna go to the neighborhoods.
Right.
You have a parking management plan, and you have a plan to direct the people to, rather than just, okay, the neighborhoods will suffer.
So, for example, there are a number of churches in this neighborhood, and if you were to talk with those churches about using their parking space, at 54th and well, it's a little ways away, but
Gas
over at
mill.
Adeline and 54th, and there's a big one at 59th and Idaho, or 60th and Idaho, there's a big parking lot there. So
The
just,
ashram has a big parking
and the
lot.
ashram, that's right.
Oh, yeah.
So get all, I mean, get them on board and have them as part of that solution, I think. Great.
And there, are, you know,
Yeah.
that's a great idea. And also the nice thing about it being Saturday is that there, I think there are some big parking lots on Hollis that are, that the businesses use on the weekdays, and
Yeah.
that some of those might be available on
Yeah.
Saturday if they are not.
Well, at 59th and Doyle, right? And you could access that from 59th, talk about that and then as well.
Now,
What was public parking at this structure?
Hollis and 65th.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be a great place too.
And some people may end up parking at the public market and then, you know, go there and tap
Yeah, they're ticketing now at the public market.
Oh, are they?
They're at least warning people, I don't know.
Okay,
But I've heard about people, it's only if you're using their facilities that you're allowed to park there.
okay. So we need to let
Have you heard
people
about
know.
that?
yeah, I've heard about that. The,
Loud and clear.
Parking there going to Big Ridge.
Maybe
The,
it's eccentric to be
you plan as you organize this, there's a lot of intersections that the closed streets will go to. Do you plan on having people there? And coming from my point of view, if I need emergency service into the inner area of it, and people are just walking and there's nobody there to control the actual route.
Our goal is to have every intersection staffed. I mean,
Human capital.
just because we know that emergency vehicles also need to go.
And none of these are super hard closures. We're not talking about, chained up,
Oh, no, I know
Steel
that,
barricades,
but
but-
15,000 people standing in an intersection could be
Yeah, yeah.
quite a bit of
Yes.
a time
Yeah.
to
to
try to
get an
clear.
emergency vehicle through, absolutely.
But I only count 18 of those really around.
But,
It's still.
and what I'm saying is if
Yeah.
there's nobody there,
No, there will be.
that if
Sure.
there's somebody there, they can
Shoot
have
people away,
somebody,
get people moving.
or they can have somebody
Sirens,
stop.
yeah.
to let them go.
Absolutely.
We had an average of three people at each intersection at Lover Lake Day, and I think that we can easily increase that. We had three stationary at each intersection, plus roving staff who were on bicycles, sort of, we call them route rabbits.
Oh,
So-
Right, yes.
So there were plenty, and I would have to say, we chose to work with the Golden Gate neighborhood group because they were at the ready, they were ready to put some human resources behind it, and I think that getting enough volunteers out on the street is not gonna be difficult.
And I want to say that in the history of this is that both in Oakland and also the one that Berkeley has done the last couple of years, that they have relied very heavily on volunteers to minimize the cost of police, over time and stuff. They're really trying to keep the costs low by using a lot of volunteers, weighing that against safety. We certainly want to be safe, and have had some success with that, with turning out a lot of volunteers.
Mark, tell me again, what is the substance of the event that will attract 15,000 people to what is kind of a handful of businesses
It's not about the
within
businesses.
this area here?
So what's going to happen is that, and I'm going to talk, Doyle Street honestly is a lovely street every day of the week. Whether it's open to cars or not, it's a pretty low traffic street, the street where Main Street in Emeryville. San Pablo Avenue, as you know, is a major freeway. There's going to be no parked cars, so that you've got this huge, wide street where suddenly, instead of, if I was riding my bike, I'd be like, oh my God, please don't kill me. Suddenly, I'm having to worry about, a 3-year-old who's wobbling in front of me, not killing him. But there's a feeling of expansiveness and getting to discover the city in a new way. When the cars are gone, you can slow down and you can see things you would not have seen before. And breathe a little freer. There will be activities that aren't, in addition to the stationary businesses, and I'll just give an example from my block, which is on the route. Across the street from me is a Yoga Tree, which is a yoga studio. We're hoping that we can convince them to come out into the street and give yoga classes. So I could walk up the street and say, oh my goodness, there's yoga classes at 10, 1:30, and 3 or whatever. I'm going to stop in and take a yoga class. Yoga's like, boy, there's a special kids day. I'm going to take my kids. to do this fun thing. And I'll just use Berkeley as an example because they did a great job with many, many events, a lot of programming last year, which also got people into parts of
Where
their...
was the Berkeley
The
then?
Berkeley is Shattuck Avenue. It goes Shattuck from
Oh, right,
up
everyone.
through Gourmet Ghetto. And Sacramento University, the first year there wasn't a lot of people, and last year they had much more programming. They had kids dodgeball, they had somebody ran a kids orchestra where the kids, all these tiny little kids had instruments and were playing. There was storytelling. There was definitely yoga. There was some public art. Some people were
So
out
between
chalk.
now and July, you'll be able to develop these kind of programs?
We are going to reach
for
out
here?
to the community and say, do you want to come out, like if NHI wanted to come out and do a program in the street, or, offer massages in the street, publicize, do some kind of activity, maybe they want to do a movement
And you
thing.
feel you can do that within this very, very limited time frame?
I think so, because it doesn't take, I don't know if you want to speak to that, Chris, because you have more
Yeah,
experience on just.
so last year, we actually worked on a very much shorter time frame for Lover Lake Day, and we had at least 40 different activities organized within a 3-month period, and more people saw so many people coming out. They actually just pulled tables around the route and did their own impromptu activities. We had musicians, we had artists, dancers, groups, bands.
Tennis.
Tennis, those slack ropes, I remember slack ball and the
hoop.
That's right. So I actually think that there are so many community resources people aren't aware of, and this is actually really a time where people really get drawn in and they want to show off what they have to offer to the community. And we've had to turn people away because we just weren't sure there was enough space to have all the activities around the route. So we actually think that this is an elongated planning period and will allow us quite a bit more time to organize folks to come out to the street. We've never had trouble getting people to produce their own activities on the route. And it is also a non-commercial event. No one really sells anything. They can offer people discounts should they go and visit their shops or their studios at a later time.
Except the food.
Except the food, yeah. So there are certain areas where the distance is just so long to cover before you get to the food pile. We've had many requests now to bring more food
There was not
to
enough
the route in the lake.
Not enough.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So those are some of the things that we're thinking of, and
I would add, I've been to Oakland's 2 events, and I've been to one of Berkeley's, and I just found it just entertaining. There's people doing all kinds of different things, and some of it's more spontaneous, some of it's more planned, but it's just, it's like having a huge open park with all kinds of festival activities going on in this, route. And I mean, I saw something that I thought was really interesting. Is it was a group of maybe 25 people, and they were all wearing headphones listening to music. You couldn't hear it, but they were all dancing, And it was the most interesting thing to watch, because you could tell they were really enjoying like whatever the music was, but nobody else could hear it. But you could just go up and put it on and listen and start dancing. So that was it's just really a sort of an informal. It doesn't take a whole lot of equipment or that kind of thing to stage something like that. But there are lots of things like that. Lots of families, children, skateboarding. People doing different kinds of acrobatics.
I think a big draw is for families with kids. That it's a time that you can bring your kids out and not worry about traffic, and even if they're still trying to learn how to ride without their training wheels, or if they're small, you can feel safe that they can run off in the street and they're going to be okay, and that's kind of freeing. And the other thing I just want to add to what Marcy was saying is that I've been to a bunch of these in San Francisco and here, and one time in San Francisco I saw a bunch of people on the route had pulled a dining room table and chairs, and we're having dinner in the street, lunch in the street, and people will make Foursquare, kids will come out and do
That was
house
the best in the middle of
Yeah.
Broadway. And
Yeah.
it was no problem playing Foursquare.
Or chalk art. Or,
chalk art, or
just all kinds of
somebody
stuff.
doing bubbles, and there was someone once in San Francisco doing bubbles anyway.
Maurice,
So are just one quick question, the streets interior to the route, are those considered part of the party or not?
I think one of them will be, because the street, it's in Oakland, I think it's 64th? What street is that? Where Rock the Bike is. Do you know what street I'm talking about? It's right near,
I think you're talking about Ocean.
no,
Is it north of
I think
Alcatraz
it's
or
not
south of
Ocean, I think
Alcatraz?
it's the one south of Ocean, which I think
Right.
is 64th.
Right.
There's the block between Vallejo and San Pablo. I think we're talking about having a street party on that block. They have done that on that block before. That's where Rock the Bike has their home, which is bike-powered music, and they will
I
definitely
mean,
be
there's no reason they couldn't be, right? I mean, it's all
Yeah.
closed off.
They can
Right.
take advantage of it.
Right, they were gonna invite, there's St. Columbus churches there on San Pablo, they were gonna invite them to have a barbecue, and they were hoping to get a whole bunch of community people to sort of do a, not, sort of an off-the-route party. And there was some talk, I missed this part of the route, but there was some talk about possibly closing or restricting traffic on the streets next to the Doyle Hollis Park, because that's the kid zone, just to make it safer. There wouldn't be through traffic there anyway, but to maybe take that back to Hollis Street, that's just a,
There won't be street monitors on the very interior.
On the interior.
No.
Most likely people might do a cut through, they will walk through, should they want to be on the other side of the route.
Bike riders, yeah.
But there are we don't plan to
No
have
plan
street
on it.
monitors on every single interior street, so.
and that block, my art studio is there, and I ride from Doyle Street to there a lot, and I will say that even on the weekend, it's not real heavily trafficked, and I think with this going on, it will be, so it'll be pretty mellow.
Okay, so the other thing is there a recommendation we need from the committee, or is it just information?
I thought this was information, although it is under action.
Well, everything's under action.
We're
on the
always
agenda.
action.
Well-
I think this is really important. I mean, I think we felt last month that we needed more information, and it sounds like that's gotten to our staff, and I don't know if the staff has met internally yet to talk about it.
Yeah, we met last week at our community event committee meeting, and that's when it was pushed up to transportation.
Okay.
So
Well,
Should
it
this go to the
sounds like a
public works?
wonderful event, and I can see there's really many positive aspects to it. But we're a very tiny city with very limited resources when it comes to public works and our police department. So the critical question for me is, following up on the July 4th turnout of all the sworn officers, whether the police department is going to be able to do that in that same month, and similarly to public works. And also, what is the estimated cost of doing that, because it's all overtime. So these two questions, I think, are pretty significant.
Yeah, if there's a way that staff could calculate certainly the costs, the in-kind costs.
Well, not only the cost, but the fact that it's following up on July 4th, where you've turned out everybody.
Well, plus, with most of our public works department, small department, people are on vacation.
That's right.
So it means planning ahead.
I mean,
That's-
as much as, it's a great idea, and I know it's been very successful in other jurisdictions. We perhaps don't have as much leeway there, but we need to answer those questions. Can we do it, and can we do it safely? And
Right, well, until it
hopefully
works through the
inexpensively.
events committee and we get all the applications and we really can see it, and it's a little bit difficult for us to put a price to it as far as,
Oh, really?
yeah, I mean, because I don't know how many people I'm gonna need, how much effort we're gonna need from our
Could you come up with a couple scenarios, maybe just to give a ballpark?
Well, it seems like if we're gonna say yes or no, we need to make sure we can pull this off with all these sort of numbers in place and all that. Is that what we're hearing? I mean, we can't start planning an event unless we know we're definitely gonna be able to hold it.
I have one suggestion, and that is that we take the most immediate action to finalize the route. And from that point on, we have our traffic specialists really punch out a detour or traffic management plan. And we work with both police and public works departments to figure out where we would be requiring your resources, and then use that as a starting point for costing things out. And I have a feeling that there are resources that we're going to get from, part of this is that it's also a privately sponsored event, so we're really looking for corporate and organizational sponsors to help fund this event. So a lot of these costs we're going to try to contain through, either really building up a huge volunteer corps to support the work, as well as just working with traffic management contractors to figure out what does it really cost to put barricades at every single one of these.
So you'll contract with the contractors to set up the barricades as part of this program?
That's what we've done in the past, and that's what I'd like to double check on the fine point, because I know when we're on City of Oakland streets, City of Oakland cops have jurisdiction, and that's the way it is. And I assume it's the same way in Emeryville. But in Emeryville, you can't have an Oakland cop go and do traffic control unless it's a shared responsibility or approved ahead of time. Frankly, the public works end is a little squishier if we're bringing an outside traffic management group who's an outside vendor who just places cones out.
Enforcement permit, or if you have the permit for the event, that would be fine.
I mean, in other words, it may free up public works from having to put a big bunch of staff and equipment on that if we're already, we're talking about another handful of blocks.
Right.
Police is another story, because I think they need to be on their streets.
Well, I think as we move forward, and we're looking at, we've got this will be on the second council meeting, this report will be on the second council meeting in April, and then May and June, but given that Emeryville is a very, very small city, and given that there is a propensity of Emeryville residents to let you know their dissatisfaction with something, I'm a little hesitant as staff to say, let's go. I think that we should get the entire council weigh in on that, in this, and know about it before we get into it, rather than it just be the snowball that's already downhill. And
I think it's an evolving process. We're learning more, we're getting more information, we're sharing our concerns. I don't see it as a done deal even signing a line right now. It's just, and I think you're right, it needs to go to council and have everyone
But for the 18th, we need to have some idea of what the costs are going to be, how many personnel are going to be required from police and public works.
And we do allow certified traffic control professionals to flag intersections. It doesn't have to be a policeman.
So if we have,
Right.
and I will say,
Construction contract.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Emeryville is a small city in terms of numbers of residents and people, but we are a big city in terms of business. And so we're really one of the assets. I think there's some advantages to this plan. One is that we're partnering with Oakland, who has experience and who's also sharing a lot of the route responsibilities. And I think Emeryville, we've got a bunch of big corporations, and some of whom we know are very supportive of this kind of active thing, like Cliff Bar. And so we may be able to, and we're really hoping our city council members can help connect us with the right people in Emeryville's business community to ask them for support, and that may really be able to make this a more, like hiring some traffic management professionals.
There's also a chamber of commerce.
Right, right. But if anyone, we're going to be calling you.
Yeah, absolutely.
To
And so
connect
the better,
us with
right?
people that you know who might be good resources for fundraising. That's one of our first tasks.
Is there any possibility you could have the refinement of the route and the estimate of how many police officers you need, and whether you can contract out the public work by the first Thursday in April?
That's next Thursday.
That's next Thursday.
I can't speak for Steve Tiffin, Shasta Pros, who did the traffic management plan for Lebanon Lake Day. I think we have to have a conversation with AC Transit first to make sure that this is not, that this route that has been suggested is going to work best for them. That's sort of the next overlay that needs to be brought into that conversation. I think we can make some preliminary report. I think he can come up, I don't know, again, it really depends on.
Well, the reason that I ask is next Thursday is a public safety meeting, and we've left out a very important entity here, and that's the fire department, because they have to be apprised of all the closures and everything
Sure.
too. So if you had at least some preliminary information for next Thursday morning, 9 o'clock over at the police station down on the peninsula, and then whatever you bring to us can be incorporated in the chief's report for the 18th. For action by the council.
So it's Thursday, April, is that April 3rd?
Third, yeah. That's a quick turnaround though, because it's stuff for the packet.
Well,
is due
this is
second.
a quick time frame.
No, I
Just
know.
put it on the
I'm saying-
agenda and then.
Yeah, we can discuss it.
Right.
It wouldn't be in the packet.
So speaking of signing on a dotted line, I was just wondering, when you do this in Oakland, is there some kind of agreement that's written up so that everybody knows who's doing what? Because there's a lot of moving parts. And, you know, especially when it goes to council, it's like, well, who's responsible for this and that? And so, yeah, how do you do
That's
that?
what we would be looking for.
Yeah.
What is the agreement?
So, WOBO does the coordination, and we put out the packet of different tasks and different leads and timeline for various components of the project. I think that when the city, the place where we get involved with the city is route determination, resources from Public Works Department and the Police Department that needs to be in place, and that has to be done far in advance.
Let me stop you there for a second. Is there a requirement for the short-term encroachment, because that's what Oakland calls it when streets are closed, or short-term encroachment on the street, that we petition the businesses and residents of that affected area?
Actually, there is for the street, for block parties, so.
Yeah,
Well, we
so,
do,
same kind of adoption?
well, we just do a notification and we allow for feedback from the community, and then based on the feedback, if there's mentioning the feedback.
It's that 51% kind of thing, you know, in Oakland, we get a petition signed by a resident saying, yeah, it's fine, or no, it's a problem, and police go and talk to them, and
You're
Sounds
handling
like-
that.
Well, we don't actually like petition that
Sure,
people sign.
but
We
it's
just
a
send out-
notification.
Yeah, we do a notification.
and how is that distributed?
It would be distributed to any business or resident that fell 500 feet within a closed street or
Okay.
an affected area.
Okay.
And
How
then
far in
based on that
advance?
Feedback. I believe it's only 15 days, but we would definitely
Well, this
do
one, right?
notification.
Yeah.
In
Wait,
planning, have you done any counts of traffic on San Pablo Avenue during this
find
time
out.
period? Because, as the commander pointed out, we have some very creative people that have found the back streets to get to where they need to be. But San Pablo Avenue is still a major thoroughfare that we're going to start to divert that number of cars onto Hollis Street or up to Sacramento or all that. That will help us in determining the staffing that we'll need. Because, you know, what's on San Pablo, worst case scenario, we're gonna get on Hollis and Shellman and everything else. And we already know what's on Hollis and Shellman and everywhere else, so our staffing
Great.
levels would be incumbent on knowing what.
Yeah, we have.
We have traffic counts for.
We have, I mean, they're actually posted on the internet, so.
Okay.
For Saturday,
Yeah, on the Saturday counts, there should be.
When UDI was doing their project, I remember.
can you,
Yeah, they're on, we have traffic counts, probably the most recent information is not on the internet yet. So if you wanted traffic counts for your studies, I could, if you give me your business card, I could email
Sure.
you.
That'd be great, thank you so
So
much.
you should probably get that,
Yeah, definitely,
Yeah.
I think that's really important.
because you're ultimately. I have to excuse myself, because I've got to get back to the 10:30 meeting, so I will leave a pile of my cards in case anybody has serious questions, concerns. You can certainly get in contact with me if need be.
Thank you.
I look forward to working with all of you. It should be very exciting. And the other voice that you hear is Steve Tiffin, who is quite exceptional in his planning. He's very detailed, so. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jim.
Yep, all right.
Can I also just say to our council members that what we're hoping for is that we can really partner with Emeryville, and that you guys will be, you know, like, I don't know if you want to call it a sponsor, but, you know, that Emeryville will, you know, help us make this work, because I think it can be a real benefit to the city. I mean, the cities that it's been done in before, it's seen as a real public, they've done studies and they found that it actually, even just one event, you wouldn't think, but it actually has a public health impact.
or when you say partner,
Divert most of it.
in
the sense
addition,
of,
in addition to public works and police, which is a major contribution,
That's what I'm.
what else are
talking
you
about.
talking about?
That's what I'm talking about.
So the other example is Jim is actually part of the Culture, Arts, and Marketing Department. There are a lot of intangibles that they provide that we never see on the books. So
They field all the calls from the public about concerns, but also they help us a lot with press and outreach. So it's communication that this is a city-sponsored event. This is something that we want people to come and enjoy. It makes a huge difference when it is a city-sponsored or a city endorsed event. You know, and there are ways. Last year we actually used some of our the City of Oakland's Measure B funds to fund inter-city departmental costs. So there were lots of interdepartmental costs that I never saw on the books because they did the printing for us, or they did the marketing, or they put bus shelter ads up at a steep discount because we, as a nonprofit, could never get those rates. So those are the kinds of things that are very intangible, but they add up. They really add up.
And we will be getting a lot of that, you know, from the city of Oakland, so we wouldn't be asking for, you know, we recognize Emeryville is a much smaller city. We certainly, right, we wouldn't be expecting, but you know, if it could go in the Emeryville newsletter that the city sends out and, you know, be promoted around, you know, that if the city, we would just love for the city to get on board, and I think it is a big, scary event, and the first time, I think, is hard, and I think we've seen that in other cities where they've done it for the first time, that the first time the city's like, I don't know about this, but the experience that other cities around the Bay have had has been really very positive for the event, so I think everybody will find that too.
Who does all the cleanup?
Volunteers,
Okay. And then Public Works come and do the sweep.
Street sweeping?
The street sweeping.
Okay, so those are contracts.
yeah, so we would need to.
And then traffic management also, you know, in terms of sort of laying out all the traffic cones and barricades and all the others, they also do a whole sweep and everything is picked up. I mean, the lake really was cleaner after the event than it was at the beginning. So, and then also, you know, the day before, our Public Works Department really put staff out there to clean up the last bits. They emptied all the garbage cans. I mean, there was a significant amount of contribution that were interdepartmental and.
But I will say that Emeryville's side of this is pretty darn clean already.
Yeah.
We do a pretty good job of that.
It was pretty sparkling last Saturday.
Yeah, so I don't think that's going to be, I mean, you know, the lake is a very heavily trafficked corridor, and I think the Emeryville side of it stays pretty clean on it. So I don't think that's going to be a big deal. I mean, we'll probably want to put up those temporary little cardboard garbage things so that.
And I'd like to make one comment, which is, maybe this is obvious, but it's one event. It's divided into Oakland and Emeryville. It's almost even, actually, which is sustainable. And so there are some things that will be done coordinated with the whole event. Like you mentioned street sweeping. It's not like we need to have street sweepers on our part and you need to have street sweepers on your part. I think it's best if it's all coordinated the best that it can be. And the one difference and distinction perhaps is the turf with the police. But we can work that out too. And so just recognizing that it's not like we're responsible for everything on our behalf, and your volunteers will be, I hope, distributed the whole route, not just Oakland side, et cetera.
Absolutely.
So, purple shirts, green shirts, right. And I just wanted to make it really explicit that it's one event.
Yeah.
It is, as a matter of fact, I
responsibilities.
think it's just so hard to distinguish which side is which.
Right, residents don't know.
Residents don't know. That's right.
Right, yeah, and as far as coordination, the committee is working on the event as a whole, and it is a little more complicated because we're coordinating with 2 cities instead of 1, but I want to say as an Emeryville resident that I'm really happy that Oakland reached out to us and offered to partner with us, because when Jack Asher was on the BPAC, she was always sort of nudging me and saying, let's do that here, when we were talking about Berkeley or Oakland open streets, but we're such a small city, it's like we could have people ride around the block, it just wouldn't be that exciting. And so this is a nice way for us to, with a lesser impact on our city, get a lot of impact, you know, have an impactful event.
Yeah, we couldn't pull it off on our own, and that's where I'm grateful to.
Yeah,
you know,
it would be a lot, and having the experience of people who've done it before is invaluable, because there are a lot of moving parts.
I know.
Chief, did you have another comment?
In the very unlikelihood that council says no, what would your route have been in planning this?
Oh, if Emeryville said absolutely not going to go through Emeryville, I suppose we could move it north.
I mean,
Or-
east.
Or
east.
it was always considered that we wanted to make this a joint event?
I think that we've always wanted to make it a joint event, but, you know, I would have to say that the North Oakland, the Golden Gate neighborhood, they realized that they were always crossing into Emeryville anyway, so there was no reason to not include Emeryville. But now, if City of Emeryville says, I don't want to be involved, move it somewhere else, we'll go back to the drawing boards.
Well, no, and my question is in a way justifying the expansion into Emeryville, because if you made the route, say Vallejo Street, which is still part Emeryville, part Oakland, we still have the impacts on the traffic on Powell Street, we still have the
Right.
impacts of traffic on San
Right.
Pablo Avenue and everything else.
Yeah.
So moving it 2 blocks
Wouldn't
west,
really
it
change
doesn't
it.
really change
But
anything.
it would be a different kind of engagement in that, you know,
Wash our
there
hands
are fewer
of it.
Emeryville
No, we couldn't wash our
intersections,
hands of
right?
it.
Yeah.
We couldn't wash our hands of it because the detours would bring everything into
I
Emeryville.
think that's a good point that you're making, is that even if, say, the route, you know, San Pablo became the west part and it
Right.
somehow went through the North Oakland neighborhood, which would be a little more challenging, there would still be closures on San Pablo that would cause rerouting
Yeah,
in
there'd be
Emeryville and
impacts.
over to Hollis. So you're right, that there would be an impact on Emeryville no matter what. So this way, it's a positive, not just a negative.
It's something out of it.
We're not just getting traffic, we're also getting this really wonderful event. And in a lot of ways, I feel like that part of Emeryville is sort of part of the Golden Gate neighborhood. You know, we go to their businesses and they come to ours.
Great, well, thank you for coming today.
Thank you so much for all your thoughtful questions.
Is there a recommendation this committee wants to make?
Well, I would
for you?
recommend that the council, you know, consider this and cooperate and direct staff to participate.
Do we need some kind of resolution from council? Do we need to ask them to pass a resolution supporting this?
I think you heard from the police chief and the public works, they would like to have the
Well, I
council
mean, the
weigh
main
in.
thing for police, I think the biggest cost is gonna be police overtime.
Right.
And if we can work with that is, I mean, you're doing your budget for, right now, you just
It's
work at your
Reserve July
budget.
1st.
Your overtime, is gonna be approved for July
We
1st.
we could put in for $200,000.
And justify it with what is that?
Yeah, what is that? Look at what we gotta do.
There
Well,
you
and
go.
one thing that we're hoping
Well,
is,
this is recorded.
we're hoping because it's on a Saturday, a lot of these events have been Sunday in the past, and this is unusual that it's a Saturday, we're hoping that that can sort of mush in more with regularly scheduled time, and I don't know, maybe.
Well, if we get all hands on deck, I think
Then
it's-
that's gonna be overtime, yeah, so. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
everyone.
much for your time. Yeah, I have
Do you support my recommendation?
It should go to the council on the 18th with the additional information that we asked for.
And it's gonna go to the traffic committee,
Public-
public safety,
Public safety.
April
Public
3rd, April
safety.
3rd. April 3rd. And with that, is that something that we can go to and answer?
Sure.
any questions?
Sure,
It's an open
open
meeting.
public
Next
meeting.
Thursday morning.
Okay.
At the
Yeah,
police
that's-
station.
Or at the police station out on the peninsula, okay.
And I think April 15 is maybe the council meeting that will be,
No, April 22nd.
oh, right,
April
22nd,
22nd.
thank you. April 22nd.
Okay, thank you.
That gives us another week.
Yes. No, but the first is when the reports are due.
Got it. All right, moving backwards, we're gonna go talk about the traffic delays on Powell Street due to construction between Christie and I-80.
So, just an update, should have been working at night, we worked last night, and
It started last night?
it actually started Sunday night and had a little bit of a conflict with some utilities they didn't expect. So they didn't get a whole lot of work done on Sunday night, but last night they were. Want to report on progress there?
Yeah, it sounds like there's 2 more nights that are needed in order to finish the work at the intersection. And then there'll be more work on Powell closer to the on-ramp. And that's probably 3 days worth of work.
Well, one of the things that I noticed, and the only reason I brought it up is because there's going to be more work there, and if there is more work done in the daytime, I noticed that when people are coming north or making that left turn, you know, eastbound left turn, and somebody wants to go into the parking lot, that parking lot should be closed off when they do work there, into the bank building.
So the driveway on Christie, just behind the gas station? Should
Exactly.
be closed?
that anytime they do work within that stretch of, from,
Otherwise, if there's one car, they'll just back up.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
understood. Makes
So-
sense, makes sense.
make that part of what they do there, that if they are doing, blocking off those lanes, that they have to close that entrance into the parking lot, because it was just a massive
So
jam.
is there much more work in the intersection during the daytime? Because I believe that left turns prohibited at night while they're working, right?
Well,
They're
they've
just sending people
been
around, right?
shutting that, we're talking about northbound Christie.
Right.
The left turn,
Eastbound,
Yeah.
the eastbound, we have double left turns going eastbound onto Christie.
Right.
right, and the number 2 lane is also closed during daytime work for Powell, for the upcoming.
All you have is one lane going northbound
Right,
and Frisky, but all it takes is one car trying to get into that parking lot.
Was it not
Turn-
East Bay Mud that was working yesterday?
It's East Bay Mud contractor.
Well, they were, I mean, they had the intersection yesterday day.
Right, because what happened was that Sunday night, they realized that they had to move their pipeline alignment, so they had to re-sock cut the street. So they did that during the daytime, so they could work at night. So,
And the stuff that is going to be closer to the off-ramps and on-ramps, that can't be done at night, that has to be done during the day?
Well, we thought it could be done during the day.
No. Try to push everything you
Yeah,
can
everything
at
tonight.
night. That is,
we'll take that information back, we'll talk to them.
So you were just doing the intersection work at night and not the rest?
We were trying to, yeah, the rest has been in the daytime because during the middle of the day, they're out of the way during the peak hour traffic. It's the midday traffic that's been affected.
It's just been really bad.
And so, right, so we felt that during the middle of the day, we've been getting by with working in the daytime. They can work a lot more efficiently in the daytime, they can see what they're doing. But if you do the work near the off-ramp at night, I don't know the effects of that, to do that at night. I mean, I don't know.
Could be done at night,
Right.
yeah.
So we can talk to them.
I mean, it has far less impact. And granted, they were gone at Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock.
Right.
But between 11 and 3, where Powell Street's a parking lot just.
gridlock.
Right,
Gridlock.
for that midday.
Yeah, and it's.
So it's
I
better
think-
to avoid it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Okay.
Okay.
And isn't there a Denny's ribbon cutting or something? When's that happening? Chamber
I
right
just went
there,
out
right?
Yesterday, I can't remember
I
the
don't
date.
remember.
It's coming up soon.
Okay, any other discussion on that?
Okay, we'll relay the message. See
Nighttime.
if we can get one night.
Okay. Item C is to consider a recommendation from BPAC adding a new item to the SIP.
So, we had a discussion
Oh, yes.
with regards to Horton Street. And we have a project in the CIP for an experimental traffic calming measure.
Right.
And so what the BPAC was concerned about was that there'd be some funding to implement whatever it is we try and experiment with.
Within that 5-year period.
Within that 5-year period. The concept we've been moving forward with is that we do the experiments, figure out what we want, and then ideally have the developer of the Sherwin-Williams site construct what we want to do there. But if for some reason Sherwin-Williams doesn't move forward, or we have problems requiring them to do certain of the improvements, they would like to have at least some funding identified in this capital improvement program to use city funds to pay for
I
it.
don't know about funding identified, I thought we called it unfunded.
Unfunded.
Right, well, I guess at least identify that we need to have.
marker.
A placeholder.
Placeholder,
For a
that's
project.
the right word. And
Why
so
not?
they had
Yeah.
suggested that we put a number in the CIP of about $500,000 to.
That was
business
pulled out of a hat,
improvement.
right?
Pulled out of a hat, because we don't know what it is we're gonna be doing. So just be identified that we would need at least $500,000 to do this work. It's unfunded at this time. And just to understand that in 2 years when we update the CIP, we'd be revisiting that anyway, so.
Right. And I don't know if it's at least 500,000 or if it's, you know, a
We don't know.
ballpark figure.
We
right?
don't know, yeah.
I'm fine with having it identified as another project that we expect to have within the 5 years. I think it makes sense. And it's unfunded, we don't know where that money would come from. I don't know if $500,000 is the right number, but
Nobody knows.
nobody knows.
Nobody knows because we don't know.
So why put it in there if nobody knows? we have time before the CIP comes up, let's get a more
Better
realistic
idea.
figure.
Well, we didn't want to spend a lot of staff time trying to figure it out, because it really depends on how the experimental traffic calming goes. That will determine what the next phase would look like.
Well, then let's say that in the CIP.
That's what it does say.
All right,
That's what it does say.
all right.
Great, well, and so if this, or when this comes to council, I guess, at the April 22nd meeting, would we have that sheet, what it would look like on the?
Well, I need to figure out how we're gonna show all the unfunded projects. I mean, if you have, because we have the experimental traffic calming measures, it could be written into that project description as, just a sentence to say that we may need about $500,000 to implement this. What I was concerned about was identifying a dollar amount and then having the developers kind of zero in on that as to their obligation. And
I see. Well, so that's why shooting high might be a good idea.
Right.
Well, and in looking at process, as the CIP was presented to all the committees, staff tried to incorporate those into the final CIP rather than this go to council and have 3 council members say, yeah, we think it should be in the CIP. This, just your recommendation, staff would
Right,
put
so
it in.
as we bring the CIP back to city council, this whole discussion is gonna be in the report, and
We'll add this discussion to the report is what I think they were looking.
It doesn't necessarily need to be approved by the council as part of the transportation committee.
Yeah.
I would think.
Okay.
I think we could just
Exactly.
leave it as part of the CIP.
We're just
Right.
passing the buck to the council.
Perfect.
Well, you're gonna,
Yeah, we're gonna have to
you know,
consider it all
at some
anyway.
point, but not necessarily as a separate discussion item on the
Right.
transportation committee.
No, yeah, that's what I'm looking at, is generally the recommendations go to council for approval,
Right.
but
And
that
this will
didn't
be part
happen,
of the SIP.
this
Right.
didn't happen on any of the other SIP recommendations from committees.
So you might just report that we discussed it and that it will be included in the
Yeah,
SIP.
exactly.
Okay, thank you for clarifying the process, obviously. Any staff comments?
Just as the commander alluded to, and we kind of didn't get anything going on it this year, but the duathlon is coming up, and
April 5th, is that right?
No, it's either 12 and 12.
Oh, the 12th.
And I think the council had already taken action through various other things that it's there, but just making the committee aware that April 12th, it'll be going on.
Great, so some streets will be closed.
Yes, it's different this year because they don't have to swim, they're mostly bicycling and running. So it's gonna be a little bit, it'll be interesting this year.
Running on
Challenge
bike.
of
We'll still bike up to on Overland and then run to Main Street.
just
And-
managing the intersections.
And in the context of our conversation today, I'd be curious, how many officers do we end up turning out? I know we usually do this as an in-kind contribution, don't we, towards the event? Or do we get,
Yeah.
we don't get paid for it? So what the costs are afterwards would be a great report.
It's a whole lot different at 8 o'clock Saturday morning than
yes.
3 o'clock Saturday
Oh,
afternoon.
absolutely.
And so.
And it's over
No
by 9:30,
contact.
right?
Yeah, and that's what, with the triathlon, we've been able to keep our costs minimal because of the time and area, but the OAKLAVIA is going to be during peak hours.
Yep. Got that. All right. Any other staff comments? No? Committee member comments?
Yeah, I just want to inform the Transportation Committee. I've asked the city manager to put a resolution on one of the upcoming agendas to protest against the transportation of highly volatile crude oil. Oakland and Berkeley are passing a resolution next Tuesday. We should be in on that. That this is extraordinarily dangerous. I'm not too sure that they don't have some of those rail cars down there parked along the marketplace right now. Very, very dangerous. And we're trying to get the whole corridor to jump in and say not through the East Bay.
And you're talking specifically about the train tracks, you're not talking about trucks?
No, this
Train.
is train.
Yeah.
100-car long trains with all filled with
I
light
saw
crude.
something on the news the other night about that, and the tanker cars had a special emblem on it, and I haven't seen that emblem on any of the tankers.
Well, keep your eye
Here.
out.
I'm gonna watch it.
Thank you. Okay. Any other?
You know, and
I
they're
think-
storing all those rail cars right next to Bay Street, right next to.
I think Jennifer made a good point in that this should consider the trucking of it also. I think that that's more volatile than the trains. There's
Well, the only thing with the truck is there's only
one.
usually one
Yes,
truck.
but-
You got 100 cars
Yeah,
of volatile
but a
crude.
truck on I-80
Oh, yeah, well.
going
But
over
they're,
has a major
with the
impact.
gasoline trucks, they're all going to various gas stations.
I don't know the details, I don't know how volatile crude is different from gasoline, is different from, you know, that's information that I don't have, and I hope that staff could provide that so that we can make an informed decision about that. Yeah, I would think so, but volatile is a good word to put in there. I don't have any other comments, and if not, we'll adjourn. Thank you, staff.